Today's shiur begins 3-4 lines from the top of Daf Samach Gimel. On the third line from the top, there is a siman, and it's essentially a method of remembering the points that will be mentioned in the upcoming Gemara. If you notice, on the side of the Gemara we have a mivneh, a structural note. The diamond is featured. These are Sidra Shel Memros Shel Rebbe Elazar. We're going to see a series of comments made by Rebbe Elazar. So the first word in the siman we call it the mnemonic, is the word Isha. The apostrophe indicates that it's a siman, and we're not focusing on the word per se, but rather it's a memory device. The first diamond introduces Rebbe Elazar's halacha regarding a person that doesn't have a wife. The next is related to karka, to land, and the third halacha is related to ezer, and the fourth is related, you can see is the word zosapam, where the Gemara darshans that particular pasuk, and on so on and so forth. There are 7 words that are related to the memros of Rebbe Elazar as they appear. So now, that having been said, we turn to the Gemara. Omar Rebbe Elazar, Kol Adam she'ein loi isha, einoi Adam. A person that is without wife, a man that is without wife is not a person. Shneimar Zachor uNekeva Baram Vayikra es Shemam Adam. That when you have Zachor and Nekeva, the male and female, then they are called Adam. But without with the Zachor alone, without the Nekeva, without the female, Zachor is the male, Nekeva the female, the Zachor, the male alone, is not called Adam. V'Amar Rebbe Elazar, Kol Adam sheyesh lo karka eino Adam. Let's read that again. Kol Adam she'ein lo karka, any person that doesn't have land, that doesn't own land, einoi Adam, he's not considered a person. Shneimar hashamayim shamayim lashem, the heavens are the Almighty's, v'ha'aretz nasan livnei Adam, and the land He, the Almighty, gave to man. V'Amar Rebbe Elazar, my dichtiv. This pasuk is from the creation story, where the woman is created by God for man. The word ezer, assistance or support, that's for his benefit, and the word kenegdo, we're going to see that it has a negative connotation. So that zacha, if the person merits, he has merit, oizraso, so the woman, the female, the wife will assist him. If lo zacha, if he doesn't have merit, then kenegdo. And Rashi explains kenegdo means that, if we look at Rashi together, kenegdo chaluka alav v'soseres dvorov. She disagrees with him and contradicts him at every possible moment. Ika di Amri, another version, Rebbe Elazar Rami, he raises an inconsistency in the psukim. Ksiv kenegdo. On the one hand, you have the word kenegdo, which Rashi explains is a lashon nagda, meaning lashes. The karinon, and we read the word kenegdo. We read it with a segol, that's kenegdo. So now zacha, then kenegdo, and here, ironically, or let's say in contrast to the aleph drasha of Rebbe Elazar, this is the base drasha. Zach, if he has merit, then kenegdo, then she will stand opposite him for his benefit. Loi zacha, if he doesn't have merit, then his married life will be menagdoso, like being lashed. So that you see something here which you can, if you see in different commentaries, you'll notice they point out that it's a function of if a person has merit or doesn't have merit, and it's not necessarily, the Gemara does not phrase it in a way that it would read if he is a sinner versus a non-sinner. There's another factor operating here. Not necessarily that's related directly to whether or not the man is a sinner, but that's a topic that one has to look into the commentaries for more elaboration. Ashkeche Rabbi Yossi, le'Eliyahu. Rabbi Yossi met the prophet Eliyahu. Omar le'Ksiv. It says in the pasuk Ese lo ezer that Hashem, the Almighty, made the woman as an ezer. B'ma isha oizrasel odom. Through what does the woman help the man? Omar le. So Eliyahu answers, Odom mevi chitin. A man, he harvests his field. So he brings home wheat. Chitim kaises. Does a person chew on raw wheat? Pishtan. He harvests flax. Flax is the raw material from which linens are made. Pishtan lovesh. Does a person wear flax reeds around his body? Obviously no. The man might bring home the raw material, but from that stage onwards, the woman processes it until it's something useful or edible. Lo ninseis meira einav umamidaso al radlov. Does it not result in? Do you not see how she enlightens his eyes, brings light to his eyes, and enables him to stand on his feet? So that the man just does. Of course, we're dealing here with traditional humanity. This is the way mankind operated from time immemorial, where the man was responsible, say, for the outside work, the bringing in, the producing of the raw materials, but the woman would then process that till its final stage. So, of course, the woman is an ezer for the man. V'yomer Rabbi Elazar, my dichtiv zois hapam etzem me'at samai uvasar mi basari. The Rashi says zois hapam michlal. We can infer from this language of zois hapam means this time. Michlal depomim achirim shimesh velo olu badaito. There were other times that things didn't work out, and that will be explained by the Gemara. So Rabbi Elazar says, the pasuk which reads Zos hapam etzem me'asamai v'som misori malame, this teaches us shebo odom al kol behemo v'chaya. Now here we're going to provide a literal translation. However, there is information found in commentaries that takes it out of its literal context. But the literal reading of this Gemara, and again, that's only one level of understanding. It very likely means something else, but it would read that man had relations with all the different animals before the woman was created. That's shebo odom al kol behema v'chaya. He had relations with all these animals. V'lo daito. He didn't have peace of mind ad shebo al chava, until he had intimacy with Chava, with Eve, the first woman. V'omar Rabbi Elazar, my dichtiv v'nivruchu v'chol kol mishpchos adama. That's a pasuk that you find spoken by the Almighty to Avram Avinu, to Abraham, and through the literal translation of the pasuk would be that through you all the nations of the world will be blessed. Omar lei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avram. However, here now the Chazal explain, darshaning the word v'nivrechu, he says, Shtei brechos toivos yeshli lahavrich boch. Havrocha is an agricultural process where a branch of a vine is bent somewhere in the middle and placed, and earth is you bend it over. The grapevine is as any vine is, it grows along. If you don't support it with stakes, it will grow on the ground. So this is a process where you take one of the vine branches and bend it in the middle and cover it with dirt, and a new plant will develop from that. A new root system will grow, and a new plant grows from the bent branch that's bent, as I said, covered with dirt. That's havrocha in general. So for our purposes, we're going to explain this as the Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu that there are two new, we'll say, plants, two new extensions that I want to come from you. In other words, we're going to describe people, two famous people, that are not from the Jewish people, but the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants them to be attached to the Jewish people to produce a special lineage. So Hashem says to Avram, there's shtei brechos, the word v'nivrechu v'cha, two new extensions from you that I want to appear. Rus hamo aviyah v'namo hamoinis. Rus is probably the more famous of the two women, but she is a Moabite woman, and she converted and joined the Jewish people. And Namo ha'amoinis, Namo was a wife of Shlomo HaMelech, the mother of Rechavam, the next king after Shlomo HaMelech. So you have two women that were attached to the Jewish people for producing that particular lineage. Kol mishpachois ha'adamah. That's the pasuk we just read. Afilu mishpachois hadoros ba'adama ein mizbachos elo b'shvil Yisrael. Even families or people that live in the ground. And one of the commentaries points out even people that live in caves. In other words, people that are seemingly far removed from the Jewish people, but through the Jewish people, they receive their bracha. Their bracha can often be interchanged with the concept of plenty. So that in the merit of the Jewish people, so even nations that live in the ground will be blessed. Kol goyei haaretz. Afilu sfinos habos migalya laspamya. Even boats that are on the high seas sailing from Galya to Aspamia, two distant nations, ein misbarchois elo b'shvil Yisrael. They are blessed, receive plenty in the merit of the Jewish people. V'omar Rebbe Lozer, asidim kol bale umaniyos sheyamdu al hakarka. A time will come in the future when all craftsmen, all artisans, will leave their crafts and be involved with agricultural activity, with plowing and harvesting. Shenemar v'yordu mei on niyosehem kol toivsei moshoit malochim kol choivlei hayom el haaretz yamodu. The pasuk describes all types of seafarers and sailors that will abandon their ships and engage in work of the land. V'yamar Rebbe Lozer, ein l'cha umanis pchusa min hakarka. Shneimar v'yordu. In the pasuk we just read, you saw the beginning of the pasuk v'yordu. The drasha of Rebbe Lozer is saying that there is no, we'll say, more lowly activity than a person who works the land, who's attached to the land. The Tosfos raises a seeming inconsistency here, because just above, Rebbe Lozer said anyone who doesn't have land is not considered a person. So the Tosfos says, Shein l'cha uminos pchusa, afagav the Rebbe Elazar gufei, even though the second diamond of Rebbe Lozer had said, Komar le'el kol adam she'ein lo karka eino adam, a person who doesn't have land is not a person. Sorch lomar karka livnois olav. That's a reference to ground, land on which to build. V'gam l'tzorch mizonosov. Kidom Rav Papa b'somuch, as Rav Papa says shortly, zravalo tasvun. V'ochamayr b'odam she'ikr umanuso b'karka. There's the idea of having land from which you derive your sustenance, and then there's this idea of being attached to land, that all of your activity is devoted to the maintenance of the land. So you can have a person that owns land, and he has a grove of trees that produce food for him, and he doesn't have to invest too much effort in order to derive his sustenance. That's one thing. But then there is a situation where a person, in order to survive, he has to work all the time at the land. That's what he's referring to here. Rebbe Lozer, we continue in the Gemara, and we should point out also we have a new marking on the side under the Nosei Mivne heading, Sidra Shel Maisim Ve'etzis Be'inyan Parnasa L'Shvachai Shel Iska. A series of comments that are made regarding income, and the Gemara will be praising the idea of of commercial activity. Iska is generally speaking, is where a person buys merchandise in one area and sells it at a profit in another area. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lozer Chazio Lahi Ara Deshodi Bei Karba Lepusya. Rabbi Lozer noticed a piece of land where Karba, there are two Shonos in Rashi. One is that Kruv, a type of vegetation, was planted in that land, and Lepusya would mean in its width. And in the width of each row, there was this vegetation, the Kruv, was planted. Another explanation of Karba is an expression, it's a word meaning plowing. So that if you take that approach, it would mean that it's the land was plowed in its width. Omar Le, Rabbi Lozer says, Itashte leurke, even if you were to plant the rows in their length, or even if you try to plow it again, hafuche beisko tovloch, be better for you to invest your energies in iska. And we said before that would mean to buy merchandise in one place and sell it at a profit in another place. Rav Lebeni Shivli. Rav walked amongst the stalks that were growing. Chazinu de Karnaifon. He saw that they were blowing in the wind, blowing one on the other. Amar lahu, inaifis isnufi. If you want to blow, blow. Hafuchi beiska tov minach. Better, though, would be to invest in business, commercial activity. Amar Rava, meo zuzi beiska, kol yoimo bisra v'chamra. Person who invests 100 zuz in an iska, so every day he'll have wine, meat and wine. Meo zuzi ba'ara, but the same amount invested in ground, in the earth, milcha v'chafura, salt and chafura. Rashi says on chafura shachas. Shachas is it's grains that one harvests before they're fully developed, so that all that one will be able to eat will be this, so-called grasses and salt. V'lo od elo meganyo le'aro u'meramyo le'tigra. Not only that, but if a person has invested in land, so he'll end up having to sleep on the floor, meganyos, to sleep on the ground, as in order to watch it, to keep it from others claiming it to be theirs, and it causes land ownership. Also, it causes people to have controversy, to have fights with others claiming it as theirs. There's always a certain tension involved in land ownership. Omar Rav Papa. Here you'll notice we have a long marking for Rav Papa's comment. Omar Rav Papa, Zra velo tazvin. That means better to plant grains for your home consumption and don't buy grains from the market. Afagav dechiadodi ninu, even though they are the same, they're the same quantity or the same cost. Hani mivrachan, the grains that you draw from your own field, they have greater blessing in them. Zovin velo tezol. Now, if we look in Rashi, velo tizvon lo tikne tvua min hashuk. That we should look at the next Rashi also of afagav dechi adodi ninu afilu chitin bezol v'karkacha eino choshuv ve'en lecha sachar afilu hachi hani mizborchen brocha mitzvi bedover she'en lokech bedomim ve'en kol maher. There is blessing. There's plenty that is in that which you have that you don't buy with money. Things that you buy with money end up being used up faster. There's a Rashi also, Zovan velo tezol. We have in our Gemara that girsa, Mechor klei tashmishcha v'ishtamesh bedomim beprakmatya kodem shetovo lidei anius. That means sell off your own personal wares and use the money for prakmatya, for investments, as we said, merchandising, but buying merchandise in one area, selling it off somewhere else, and do all of that before you come to impoverishment. So that's the eitzah Rav Papa is giving, the counsel that he's giving, Zovin velo tezel. Better to sell off your wares, and if that's what you need to do to create cash flow, and then buy merchandise and profit with it before you come to impoverishment. Hani mili bistarki, the idea of selling off your own housewares, that's when it comes to bistarki. Rashi says klei habayas, utensils, household utensils. Avol glima lo misramile, but we're not suggesting that you sell your glima. That's a type of overcoat that one wears. Rashi says shilis kabe b'levishosa. It's something that increases your honor when you wear it. That we're not saying to sell off to create the cash flow. And why is that? Because who says you're going to find another one, an alternative one later? So reading that again in the Gemara, avoglima lo misram yolei kidavoy. But with regard to the idea of creating a cash flow through glima sales, that no, because who says you're going to find a good one, a suitable one? How do you like the pun there? A suitable one. Who says you're going to find one later? We continue with more eitzes from Rav Papa. Toim velo tashbitz, shvotz velo tivni. And we look at Rashi. There's a double star. The word tom means to seal something up. So at the double star, im yesh l'cha chor koton b'kais ru'ah. If you have a small hole in a shaky wall, sisoim oisoi miat, seal it immediately. V'lo tarchiv v'nekev l'shapetz boi tit ulevenim harbe liaposo. Better to seal it immediately before it widens, and that will necessitate your need for mortar and bricks in order to improve it. And the word shpots, so that we said to better seal a small hole as soon as it develops, instead of what's modern Hebrew, you hear the term shiputzim, improvements, home improvements. Here we're talking about wall improvements. So better to seal the hole when it's very small before you come to the need for shiputz. However, shpots velo tivni. So on this Rashi says shpots v'imbal nefesh ata la'nois binyonecha. If you're someone that likes beautiful structures, harchev hanekev v'shaptzehu v'yosyofe. Better to widen the hole and add all kinds of improvements there. Better that than velo tivni. Rashi says lo tapilus kol hakoisel l'tivneo. Better than knocking down the entire wall and rebuilding it. So why is Rav Papa telling you to avoid building from the scratch? Shekol ha'oisek b'binyan, the Gemara says, mis maskein. All those who invest in building from scratch end up impoverished. Kvoitz zovin ara mosu nosevitza. When it comes to an opportunity to purchase land, so grab the opportunity, jump upon it, seize upon the opportunity. Don't dilly-dally before buying land. However, when it comes to nosevitza, marrying a woman, mosun, what does that mean? Mosun is you don't jump into it. Rashi says mosun nosevitza hamtein, wait ad shetivdoik ma'aseh shelo te'eh ra'ah v'kantaronis. Check out her ways, her characteristics, her attributes. Make sure that she's not a bad woman and a cantankerous woman. We continue with more eitzes. Nochis darga nosiv itza. When it comes to choosing a mate, a wife, so you don't choose a woman that's more important than you, more miyuchas than you, that she's more choshev, because that could lead to a situation where she will look down upon you. So nosiv, the Gemara's nochis darga, go down a step. and then take a wife. Not to take a wife that's above you. Sok darga bechar shushbina. And the opposite is true when it comes to choosing a shushbina, a close friend. Someone who is going to be your confidant or your close friend. Choose a person that is higher than you, that's more important than you, and cling unto him. Omar Rav Elazar bar Avina, ein puranas bo li'olam elo b'shvil Yisrael. So here we have a comment that if you didn't know you were learning the Daf Gemara, you would think this is coming from some type of arch anti-Semite. But let's just translate it. It says that puranas, punishment or troubles, do not come to the world other than because of the Jews. Shenemar hichrati goyim noshamu pinoisam hechrafti chutzoisam. The pasuk describes how HaKadosh Baruch Hu has destroyed nations. Uksiv amarti ach tiri osi tikchi musar. The Rashi explains that it is the Jewish people need to straighten out. They need to become more God-fearing. So in order to put the fear of the Lord into their hearts, Kodesh Baruch Hu will bring puranas upon the world. There will be, there could be mass devastation, nations being destroyed, and all of that in addition to the actual sins of those particular nations. But there's another agenda over here, and that is to create fear in the hearts of the Jews, as Rashi says, liyarom kidei shi'afsu b'tshuva, to put fear in their hearts so that they will repent. But nevertheless, this statement is quite profound, that all troubles in the world come because of the Jewish people. And it doesn't mean for one second that if you get rid of the Jewish people so the troubles will go away. That, the Gemara says in Maseches Tainis, the world cannot exist without Jews. The pasuk that we read indicating that puranas comes to the world was hichrati. We're reading this again. Hichrati goyim, I cut off nations. Noshamu pinoisam, and I left desolate their corners. Hechrafti chutzosam, and I destroyed their markets, their areas. Uksiv amarti ach tir'i osi tikchi musar, and you can see in the same context where the Kodesh Baruch Hu is interested in the Jewish people accepting chastisement and straightening out their ways. Rav hava mifter mi Rabbi Chia. Rav was departing from Rabbi Chia Marley, and he said, Rachmana litzloch mimidi dekosha mimoisa. The Almighty should save you, protect you from something that's more difficult, more painful than death. Is there something that's more painful than death? Nofak do v'ashkach. So he went out and checked this matter. He investigated and found. The pasuk says, "Umotzei ani mar mimoves eso isha," and I found something more bitter than death: the woman, the wife. Rav hava kometzara le devisu. Rav was afflicted, was oppressed by his wife. Ki omar lo avidi li tlufchi. When Rav would request of his wife to prepare a dish known as tlufchi, so avdole chimtzi. Instead, she would prepare for him chimtzi. Chimtzi is a type of legume. Chimtzi avdi le tlufchi. And if he asked for a dish of chimtzi, she would make for him a dish of tlufchi, some other type of vegetation. So, in other words, the whatever Rav requested, so she did something else. Ki godel chiobre apichla. When Chia, the son of Rav, got older, so he switched things around. In other words, if Chia, the son of Rav, knew that his father wanted tlufchi, he would ask his mother, would you make chimtzi? Now, knowing that upon hearing instructions to make chimtzi, she'll make tlufchi. So by requesting the opposite of what his father wanted, the end result would be what his father wanted. Amar Lei, so Rav says to his son, I Alya Loch Imoch, has your mother improved? Because Rav was being fed that which he really wanted. So Amar Lei, so Chia said to his father, Anohu dekafichna la, I put in the request in the opposite fashion. Amar Lei, Rav said, Hainu dekamri inshi, it's based on an incident like this that people would say, or what people would say is appropriate for this incident, the nafik minoch taimo malfach. He who comes forth from you, in other words, your descendants, they teach you taimo malfach. They teach you wisdom. So that Rav was impressed with this method of getting the right food. However, at lo tavid hachi, do not continue behaving this way. Because what are you saying? Yes, you know that I want tlufchi. You go and you tell your mother that dad wants chimtzi, knowing full well that if she hears chimtzi, she'll make tlufchi. Don't do that, because the pasuk says, "Limdu l'sheinim daber sheker ha'avei v'chulei." The pasuk exhorts against teaching to lie, and in fact, doing this, you're getting yourself accustomed to telling an untruth, to lying. Rabbi Chia have komitzara lei devisu. Now the double underline we featured on the side under the Nosei Mivneh heading. These are Maisim im Amoraim sheneshosem tziro lahem. Incidents with Amoraim whose wives caused them pain, were oppressive, were difficult to be with. Here you have something also just on a side comment basis. When we speak about the likes of Rav or Rabbi Chia, these are people whose righteousness level is something that we cannot begin to perceive. So that these very great men had wives that were difficult to live with, to put it mildly, and yet that's what they had. So one must conclude, as we alluded to earlier in our the early part of today's shir, when we spoke about Zocha, then Ozraso, Lo Zocha, Kenegdo, the issue has to do with a person having merits. And the merits, a person gets that not necessarily only through his own kiyum hamitzvahs and his own non-sinning. There are other factors involved. And it would seem to be that's the case over here, that Rav went through this tsar with his wife because of some other factors beyond the realm of simple sinning and mitzvah performance. And likewise here, Reb Chia had a wife that was mitzayer him, that caused him pain. Ki have mashkach midi, when Reb Chia would find something, tzayer le besudre umaisi ni Allah, he would wrap it up in a cloth and bring it to his wife as a gift. So that if we look in Rashi, ki have mishkach midi davar haroila, when he would find something that was fit for his wife, something that she would like, so he would take that item, wrap it up, and bring it to her as a gift. Omar le Rav, who just so happened to be Reb Chia's nephew. So Rav says to Reb Chia, "V'ha kol mitzara le lamor." Your wife causes you a lot of pain. How is it that you bring her gifts all the time? Omar le. So Reb Chia answers, "Dayenu shemegadlois bonenu umatzilois oisanu min." We're at the top of Omid Beis min hachet. That even if it's hard to live with her, she is a cantankerous woman, or she contradicts everything I say, or whatever, it's enough that she raises our children and she protects us, she saves us from sin. What does that mean, to save us from sin? Rashi says, min hachet hirur avera. The fact that a person has a wife, so he can his thoughts concerning women, which is certainly a natural tendency of men, he can focus them on those kind of thoughts on his wife, so he's saved from hirhur avera. And of course, having the ability to engage in intimacy with one's wife also will prevent this from happening. Of course, we're hopeful that it will prevent this from happening. Hirhur avera, thoughts of an immoral nature. Makri lei Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak Brei. Rav Yehuda was teaching his son Rav Yitzchak. Makri is to teach psukim. So Rav Yehuda was teaching his son Rav Yitzchak. V'moitze ani mar mimoves es ha'isha. The pasuk in Kohelet says, and I found something more bitter than death, and that is the woman. Amar le kegon man. So Rav Yehuda, who was teaching his son, so his son asks his father, who's an example of that? Of a woman that's more bitter than death. So the father answers, kegon imcha, someone like your mom. The Gemara asks a question, notice it lasts a couple of lines. Eini, is that so? V'ha masni le Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchak Brei. But the same father-son team, you have the father teaching his son the following: Ein adam moitze kairas ruach ela meishto rishona. A person does not experience peace of mind other than through his first wife. Shenemar yi mekor chabaruch usmach me'eshes neurecha. V'yomar lei, and the son, after hearing his father teach this, says kegon man. Who is an example of a woman that provides this peace of mind to her husband? So he answers, kegon imcha, someone like your mom. So that your mom is a seemingly wonderful lady. So how can, in the discussion just before, where Rav Yehuda was teaching his son, and in response to his son's question, he says, well, if you want to know an example of someone like that, that's marmi moves, that's more bitter than death, your mom. So how can you say that your mom is more bitter than death, and your mom is also the source of my peace of mind? So the answer is as follows: Maskif tkifa. She's a type of woman that gets riled up, that gets enraged quickly. The avure mavra b'mila, and she becomes calmed or assuaged with just a mere word. In other words, she might have a quick temper. She might be a type of person that becomes enraged, but it's very easy to cool her down. Heichi domi isha ra. What is an example? What's an example of a woman that we can classify as a bad wife? Omar Abaye, mekashto le taka umekashto le puma. There are different possible translations of this line. We're going to go with the Rashi explanation, and that is that she mekashto le taka. Taka is a table, so she decorates a table. Could be the idea of her setting up a table for a meal. And then umekashto le puma. So this Rashi says lekale legadif adzman suda kedei letzaro. And even though she's setting up a beautiful table, she's cursing out her husband until the actual meal begins in order to pain him. That's what's alluded to mekashto le puma, that through her mouth, puma's a mouth, so she curses him out until mealtime. Rava Omar. Rava also explains what's an isha ra. It says mekashto le taka umahadra le gabo. So we look at Rashi again on the second line. Umahadra le gabo shelo le'echol imo umitzaroso. She prepares a meal. She prepares the table and a meal, but when it comes to the actual eating, she turns her back on him to eat somewhere else. So that's an example, a second example of an isha ra. Omar Rabbi Chama bar Chanina, Kevon shenos odam isha avonosav mispakikin. When a person marries a woman, So the sins that he's committed are mispakikin, they become sealed up. Shenemar motza isha motza toiv vayofek rotzoin me'ashem. So in this pasuk it says, man finds a wife, so he's found good, and vayofek, that's this idea of the sins being sealed up. And of course, when we say sealed up, it means sealed up and removed, and no threat to you. B'marava, in Eretz Yisrael, kinosiv inish itza, when a man would marry a woman, amri lehachi, they would turn to the groom and ask, Motza o Motzei? Very short question. Motza o Motzei? And now what's the explanation? Motza dichtiv, Motza isha, Motza tov. Are you someone that has found a wife that can be equated with having found something good? Now, Motzei, what's that an allusion to? Dichtiv u Motzei ani mar mimoves eso isha. I have found that which is more bitter than death, the wife. So in Eretz Yisrael, they would ask a man, seeming newlywed, did you find something that's good, or did you find something that's no good? Omar Rava. We have a new marking, and on the side under the nosei, heading the triangle, introduced Sidra Shel Memros Shel Rava Be'inyan Isha Ra. A series of comments made by Rava that are related to an evil or bad woman. Omar Rava. Isha Ra mitzvah legarsha. A bad wife, it is a mitzvah to divorce her. Tertiv goresh leitz v'yetzei modoin v'yishbois din v'koloin. Goresh is to divorce, to set, to distance, to set out of your midst the scoffer, and with that you avoid strife in your house. V'omar Rava isha ra uksubasa meruba. A bad wife, however, it's not so easy to get rid of her, because the ksuba, this is the money that a man is obligated to pay in the event that he divorces his wife, and it happens to be a lot of money. That's a large, meruba means a lot, a large ksuba, large amount to be paid to her. So how do you improve your situation? How do you make the bad wife better? So the eitzah is Tzarasa B'tzida. A tzara is a co-wife. So Rashi says, Yisa acheres etzla. Marry a second wife. The Gemara continues, the Amri Inshi, people say, B'chaverta velo b'silta. Rashi says, B'chaverta mekabeles teichacha yoser. She accepts more chastisement by having a co-wife to contend with. In other words, she sees that there's competition, so she's going to straighten out, because she now knows that she doesn't have a monopoly on her husband. Tosfos adds here, Sorasa B'tzida, Rava L'tamei. Rava here is consistent with what he has said, what he says elsewhere. The Amar B'soif Pirkin, he says at the end of the Perek, Noisei Odom Kama Noshim Alishto, that there is that a person is entitled to have multiple wives. Let's continue in the Gemara. We should translate, though, the last phrase, the Amri Inshi, people say, B'chaverta v'lo b'silta, meaning she'll accept more chastisement through a co-wife, through competition, more than being pierced by a thorn. V'omar Rava, Kosha Ishara Kiyom Sagrir. It is difficult to withstand. The difficulty of withstanding a bad wife is like a day of hail and winds. Shenemar delef toireid biyoim sagrir v'eshes midyonim nishtova. The eshes midyonim is a woman of strife, is equal to this type of inclement weather, as the posuk mentions. V'omar Rava bo urei kama toiva Isha Toiva v'kama ra Isha ra. So here's a point that lasts a number of lines, and Rava wants to make the point of how extremely good a good wife is, and how, to the contrary, a bad wife is. Kama toiva isha toiva. The pasuk says, Motza isha motza toiv. Now, we saw this pasuk cited earlier. This is a pasuk from Mishlei, and it's worth noting that the book of Mishlei is understood in general to be, they're analogies, and they have to do with Torah learning. So, the pasuk says, Motza isha motza tov, I begavo mishtoi kra. If the pasuk is talking about an actual wife, begavo means within her, meaning focused on an actual woman, then kama toiva isha toiva shakosov mishabcha. How wonderful it is to have a good wife, that it is the focus, it's the subject of a verse that praises her. I b'torah mishtoi kra. And if the pasuk is really referring to the Torah, and it refers to the Torah in terms of a woman, so kama toiva isha toiva, you see how wonderful a good wife is. Sha Torah nimshalabah, that the Torah is being compared to her. Then there's no greater entity than the Torah in our world. And if that is the case, that the pasuk is referring to the Torah, then, and it's being compared to a woman, a good woman, so you can imagine how great that is. Kama ra isha ra, how bad it is to have a bad wife. Dechtiv umoitse ani mar mimoves eso isha. I begavo mishtoi kra. If the pasuk is talking about a woman, so it's then very clear. Kama ra isha ra shakasu megano, how bad it is to have a bad wife, that the pasuk describes her in such negative terms. Now, there's an alternative understanding of the pasuk, that it's a reference, it's an analogy to purgatory. So, kama ro isha ro shegehenim nimshalabah, how bad it is to have a bad wife, that Gehenim, that purgatory, is compared to her. On a certain manner, a certain level of understanding, one might actually look at a situation like this and flip things around and say, well, if a person is consigned to a bad wife, then at least it has the purging capacity of purgatory. Or just like Gehenim cleanses one of sin, so a person who's able to endure a bad wife, it can be imagined as that's a process of cleansing from sin. All of this, of course, is assuming that the husband is a proper individual, is behaving in a proper way, and he not be the cause of the isha ra. Obviously, then he has it coming to him. We have a structural note on the side where we feature diamonds numbered 1 through 3, and a double underline appears also. These are 3 psukim shenidrishu shemityachasim liisha ra uksubasam ruba, to the situation we touched on before, where a man has a bad wife, but it's not so easy to get rid of her, to divorce her, because that would involve him paying an exorbitant amount of money. The Gemara. Hinani mevi ra asher lo yuchlu lotzeis mimeno. The prophet describes evil that will be brought upon people that he will not be able to extricate themselves from. What is that evil that a person can't get out of? Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rabba Bar Avua, Zu Isha Ra'a, Uksubasa Meruba. That's the description of a man married to a bad wife, but has obligated himself to pay an exorbitant amount of money upon her divorce. The pasuk says, Nisonani Hashem bidei lo uchalkum. Hashem, the Almighty, has put me in the hands of someone that I cannot stand up to. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Mar Ukva Bar Chia, Zu Isha Ra'a Uksubasa Meruba. That's an example of a man who's married to a bad wife and has an exorbitant ksuba to pay. B'Marova Amru, in Eretz Yisrael, they have a different take on this pasuk. Zeh Shemezenoisav Tluyun Bekaspo. This is a person whose maintenance, whose food is dependent on his cash. Rashi says on the fourth line from the top, she'ein lo zriya b'karka, he doesn't have any things planted in a field. The chalshah meitzar v'doig, at all times he's concerned, he's preoccupied and worried. Shemot yakir atvua o yinalu sharei shever. He has a certain finite amount of money, and he's worried that the cost of grains will increase, or that the markets will be locked up and he'll have nothing. If a person has property with food growing on it, so he doesn't have that worry. The Pasuk says, Bonecha v'nosecha nesumim liam acher. Omar Rav Chonon bar Rava, Omar Rav Zu Eishes Ha'av. That's a situation where a man has a wife that's not the mother of his children. So that's as if his sons and daughters are given over to another nation. Begoy novol achisem. I will enrage them, the Almighty says, in chastising the Jewish people. I will enrage them with a lowly nation. Omar Rav Chonon bar Rava Omar Rav Zu Isha Ra Uksubasa Meruba. Another example of a pasuk that focuses on a man married to a bad wife, and on the other hand he can't get out of it because he has a very large ksuba that he has to pay up. And we noted that was Aleph. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, the Rabbi Eliezer's interpretation of this pasuk, Begoy Noval Achisem Elu Hatzedukim. That's a reference to the Sadducees. V'chein hu Omer, Omar Noval Belibo Ein Elokim. The churl says in his heart, and he denies the existence of the Almighty. And that is what the Tzedukim were guilty of. The term Tzeduki in the Gemara can also be a veiled hint or a reference to apostates, and hence the Gemara is quoting this pasuk that the Noval is someone who says, who's a denier of the divine. B'masniso tana elu anshe barbaria v'anshe martanoi. The pasuk describes the pasuk of Goy Noval Achisem is a reference to people from these lands, Barbaria and Martanoi. Shemahalchim arumim b'shuk. They walk unclothed in the public. She'ein l'chom meshukatz metuav l'fnei hamokom. There's nothing more reprehensible and disgusting in front of Hashem, Yosem Yimi Shemahalech b'shuk arum, more than someone who walks naked in public. A fourth approach, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Elu Chaborim. It's a reference to a nation of people called the Chaborim. Amru Leil Rabbi Yochanan Osi Chabori Lebovel. Rabbi Yochanan was informed that the Chabori have arrived in Babylonia. Shoga Nofal. He bent over and fell out of pain of hearing this bad news. Omrule, they told Rabbi Yochanan, Mekabli Shochada. They're a kind of people that can be bought off. You can bribe them. Toritz Yosef, he straightened up and sat upright. Gozru al Shlosha mipnei Shlosha. There's a note in Rashi. We have a star. You can see Rashi says, Omrule al Shlosha Gozru Omar lahem mipnei Shlosha veros shahayu biyad b'nei Bavel. In other words, the Chabori came with 3 harsh edicts, and Rabbi Yochanan tells them he understood why that happened. He sees the divine hand and says it's a result of 3 sins of the people. Gozru al Habasar, and this as we are making this recording, this Gemara sounds awfully contemporary, but Rashi says Gozru al Basar shelo yochlu basar shchuta, and they made an edict forbidding slaughter of meat, kosher slaughtering. In other words, the translation of Rashi is they made a gzera that you shall not eat properly slaughtered meat. a very contemporary sounding thing as we are making this recording. How many countries in the world are adding this to their list of we'll call it means of oppressing the Jews in the veiled context of animal rights and whatever else have you. But nevertheless, when you see this happening, he says mitnei hamatonos. What does that mean? Because the Jewish people were not diligent in giving the kohanim their rightful portion of slaughtered meat. The Torah provides for kohanim to receive from every slaughtered animal. This has nothing to do with sacrifices, but rather from common animals that one slaughters. They are to receive the forearm, that's the zra, the lechayim, the cheek and tongue, and the cave on the stomach of all animals. And they were not diligent in that. So if you're not diligent in the meat that you slaughter, so you lose out altogether in slaughtering meat. Gozru al hamer chatzois mitnei hatvila. They ruled against having bathhouses available, and that's because people were not careful with proper immersion. Ka mechateti shachvi, and they would exhume the dead from their graves. Another very, very contemporary sounding problem, and this is that the Jewish people would rejoice on their holidays, so that when the Goyim have their holidays, so let them be well, so to speak, let the Goyim enjoy their holidays. That doesn't mean that the Jewish people have to celebrate the Gentile holidays in festivity, so that they were joyful during their holidays, their idolatrous holidays, and as a result of that, even the dead don't enjoy peace. These goyim would exhume the dead from their graves. Shneimar v'hoisa yad Hashem bochem uve'avoisechem. The hand of the Lord will punish them and their forebears. Their forebears that already are dead. How could that be? So we just explained through their bodies being exhumed. Omar Rabba Bar Shmuel Zu Chatuti Shachvi. The pasuk that we just read is a reference to Chatuti, is to dig out the Shachvi, the dead. Domar Bavon Chaim, through the sins of the living, Meisim Mischatetim, the dead are exhumed. Omar Le Rava Le Rabba Bar Mori. Ksiv Lo Ye'asfu V'lo Yikavru L'doimen Al Pnei Ha'adamo Yu. One pasuk says that regarding the deceased, the dead, they won't be gathered and they will not be buried. They will be like dung on the face of the ground. Uksiv v'nivchar moves mechayim. Another pasuk says that they will choose death over life. And Rashi explains what the problem is over here. That after the pasuk of lo yasfu lo yikavru, they won't be buried. The pasuk then says they'll choose death over life. Well, why would anyone choose death if they're not going to be dealt with properly in death? They won't be buried. How could the living choose death when that will be their fate? Omar lei nivchar moves lo rishoyim shelo yichyu ba'olam hazeh v'yechteu v'yiplu begehenim. The drasha or this pasuk says v'nivchar moves l'chaim means it's better for the wicked to die than to continue living and sinning and end up in Gehenna, in purgatory. So that Rashi, we see there's a Rashi where we have a double star. Omar lei, hai nivchar lo ka'omar shu hein bocher moves mechayim. The pasuk is not like we thought that the people will be choosing death over life. Rather, the prophet is telling them, better for the wicked to die than continue living and sinning. As you can see, we have a slash mark indicating a new section of Gemara, even though it continues with the topic of Isha Ra and Isha Toiva. Nevertheless, we're treating this as a separate trend of thought because we're featuring Sefer Ben Sira, and that's what our topic heading is. Kosuv b'Sefer Ben Sira. The following is written in Sefer Ben Sira. Exactly what this work is, there is a discussion amongst the commentaries, but one thing is for sure: it's Sefer Ben Sira, though it might very well date to the era of the prophets. It is not classified as a holy book. Hence, it's not part of the canonized Tanakh. It's a book, though. It's a book of work that has in it points of wisdom that the Shas cites on occasion. So it says in this book called Sefer, the book of Ben Sira, Isha Toiva Matana Toiva B'chek Yirei Elikim Tinosein. A good wife is a pleasant gift. It is given into the midst, into the bosom of a God-fearing individual. Now, that doesn't mean that one can infer that a bad wife is given to a non-God-fearing person, because we saw before the greatest of our people, the likes of Rav and Reb Chia, they had women that the Gemara describes as Isha Ra, and they were the ultimate in God-fearing individuals. But nevertheless, if one is God-fearing, it's reasonable to let's say see a correlation between one's God-fearingness and the receipt, the merit of having a good wife. Isha Ra Tsoras Lebala. A bad wife is like the Tsoras, skin affliction, to her husband. Maita Kante, what is the solution for a man that suffers from a bad wife? Yigarshena v'yisrape mitzoraso. Divorce her, and you are thereby healed from your tzoras. Isha Yafa Ashrei Baila. A beautiful woman, fortunate is her husband. Mispar Yomov Kiflayim. His life is as if it were doubled. Rashi says, Klomar, Someach bechelka v'doimelo ki'ilu yomov kiflayim. He's so happy having this beautiful wife that he feels that he has an especially long life. Ha'alem einecho me'eshes chein. Look aside from, do not focus on, look away from a woman married to others, a charming woman that's married to someone else. Avoid her, pantiloked b'mitzudasa, so as not to become entrapped in her net. Al tate eitzel baila, don't go over, don't veer over toward her husband. Limsochi mo yayin v'shecher, to have drinks of wine and beer. Ki b'toar isha yafa rabim hushchasu v'atzumim kol harugel, because in the beauty of a gorgeous woman, many have been destroyed and many have died. This advice is something that one should ponder and take to heart, especially in societies where there's a great deal of contact between the different genders. Of charming women, and we're talking especially in the context of there being married women, men should know how to avoid having contact with them. Rabim hoyu pitzei roichel hamargilim lidvar erva kenitzotz mavir gacheles kekluv molei oif kain boteim maleim mirma. So now we take a look at Rashi. The pasuk describes as many are the bruises absorbed by the roichel. What's a roichel? Rashi says, a person who sells perfumes to women for their own improvement. Liskashe often means for their decoration or beautification. So we're talking about the perfume salesman. Umotsui bo niuf ubo bailo upotso. what happens is these people have dealings with women, and they might, in fact, a rochel is a person who's a vendor. He goes to their houses, and then the husbands of these women customers come home and see the rochel, see the perfume salesman there, suspects them of foul play, or it's maybe in fact foul play is common by them, and the husbands beat them up. So that's what the Gemara means when it says Rabim hoy pitzei rocha hamargilim lidvar erva. They're commonly found in immorality. The next expression was kenitzotz mavir gacheles. Rashi says kenitzotz mavir, kenitzotz h, like a spark of fire, mavir gacheles, that lights a coal. Kain yitzro mavir, so too his passion inflames him. The next description was kikluv, as a kluv is a cage, mole oif, like a cage full of birds. Their boteim, their houses, are filled with deceit. The next point in the Gemara, al teitzar tzoras mochar, one shouldn't be overly concerned with the troubles of tomorrow. Kilo teida ma yeled yom, person doesn't know what the next day will bring. Shema mochar ba, the next day might come. V'einenu, and he is dead. He dies before tomorrow comes. Nimtzo mitzar al ha'olam she'ein shelo, and the result is that he was all worried about a world that he is not a part of. Mina rabi mitoch beisecha v'lo hakol tov li beisecha. Your house should not be a central bus station or train station. Your house is not a place for the public to assemble. That's minah, is to restrain the masses from coming in your house, and don't bring just anybody into your house. Well, that sounds like a person should become a hermit. Not so. Rabim yu dorshe shlomicha. The many should be those that seek out your welfare. In other words, you should be a nice guy, that people should be interested in your welfare. People should ask, how are you doing? But at the same time, in order to achieve that does not necessitate your hosting the masses in your house. Galei soid le'echad me'elef. As far as matters of privacy or secrecy, reveal them to only 1 out of 1,000. Omar Rabbi Asi. Ein ben David ba ad shichlu kol haneshama shebaguf. The Ben David, the Moshiach, the Redeemer, will not come until all the souls in the guf have been cleared out. The guf is a spiritual, it's a container or entity in which the souls that were created at the beginning of time are located, and through procreation, through birthing children, the souls descend from this entity called guf, and with that entity being cleared out of all the souls, then the Redeemer comes. Shenemar ki ruach milufanai ya'atof unishamois ani osisi. The Rashi says, Shenemar ki ruach milufanai ya'atof ha-ge'ula unishamos shani osisi ya'atof. And the Rashi says, Umeiseife l'reishei midrash. The pasuk is darshan from the end toward the beginning, so that through the I will bring the geula, that's the atof, through the clearing out of the souls, the spirits. The Gemara continues, and we note on the side we have a nosei topic heading, Deos tanoim al mi she'eno oisek b'piriv v'ribya. Different Tanaic expressions or opinions regarding one who does not engage in procreation. In other words, people who decide to remain singles, avoid marriage. So by definition, they are not participating in period of Aribia. They're not participating in procreation. So what do the Chazal have to say about that situation? Editorially speaking, we're not making light of the situation of trying to find a proper mate. On the other hand, there is no Torah justification for a person remaining unmarried. There's a certain amount of flexibility that a person has to have, willingness to give things a try, etc., when it comes to choosing a mate. So, as we say, on the one hand, it's a serious matter. People have to, as we saw in a previous Gemara, Nosav Itza, one has to not jump into a marriage, but check it out, make sure that the woman that a man is choosing is a proper type woman, a proper wife. But with that having been said, one cannot hide behind the we'll say that advice and say, well, it's just taking me an awfully long time to find the right woman, and all of this time, so he's not engaged in period of Aribia. So let's see how serious this matter really is. So we will see 4 comments. Number 1, you will see in the Gemara, we have written on the side, Kilu Shofech Domim, he's considered as a murderer. He is Memayit Hadmus. He reduces the spirit, the divine presence. Gorem L'Shchina Shetisalik Misra. He causes the divine presence to leave Israel. And a 4th is that he is Chayav Misa. He deserves to die. The Gemara, Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kol mi she'ein oisek b'piri v'ribya. Anyone who is not involved in trying to procreate, ki'ilu shoifech damim. It's as if he's shedding blood. Shenemar shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishofech. V'ksiv basrei v'atem pru'urvu. So by juxtaposition of verses, we see a pasuk describing a murderer, shofech dam ha'adam, and it is juxtaposed with the necessity of procreation. Hence, one who doesn't engage in procreation is considered like a murderer. Rabbi Yankiv Omer, Ki'ilu Mimayit Hadmus. The Dmus is a spiritual phenomenon of we'll say the presence of the Almighty. So it's as if you're reducing the presence of the Almighty by not engaging in period of Aribia. Shenemar ki b'tzelem Elokim asa es Adam. So a man is created in what's often translated as in the image of God. God, of course, doesn't have a physical or corporeal image, but there is an analogy to the attributes of God. So man is created in that spiritual image. Uksiv basrei, and again in juxtaposition you have be'atem pru uravu, the need for the commandment, the obligation of procreation. So if one is engaged in procreation, so he creates the image of God, and the opposite is also the point, and that's what Rabbi Yankiv is saying. Ben Azai Omer ki'ilu shofech domim u'memayit hadmus. He cites both. He's considered as a murderer and one who is responsible for reducing the divine image. Shenemar, it says after both of these, it says v'atem pu'uravu amru lo leben Azai. They turn to Ben Azai in amazement. Yesh noah dorish noah mekayim. There are those that preach nicely and live accordingly. In other words, they what we say in English, they practice what they preach. There are those noah mekayim v'ein noah dorish, those that practice nicely, even though they're not necessarily those that lecture on the matter. V'ata, but you are noah dorish, you lecture nicely, say nice things. V'ein noah mekayim, but you don't practice what you preach. Ben Azai was one who was single. Omar lohen Ben Azai. Ben Azai says back to them, Ma, said, what can I do? Shenafshi choshka b'torah. My spirit, my soul desires Torah. It's possible for the world to be maintained by others. Ben Azai was extremely bound up with his Torah learning. He was so involved with it, he couldn't possibly treat a wife as a wife needs to be treated. So in the interest of his Torah learning, he chose this path of non-oisek b'pir v'ribya. The Tosfos adds a little bit regarding Ben Azai. On the Tosfos says sheyiskayim aideachim afagav the mashperik afalpi. Even though in the 5th parak of Ksubas it appears shenasa bito shel Rabbi Akiva, that he actually was married to the daughter of Rabbi Akiva. The Komar Hasam, it says there Bartesh Rabbi Akiva after le Ben Azai hochi, that as Rabbi Akiva's wife dealt with Rabbi Akiva, so Rabbi Akiva's daughter dealt with Ben Azai, indicating that Ben Azai was married. The Gemara answers, the Tosfos answers, Ha'omar b'perakama de Sota, but it does say in Masechet Sota, the Nasa v'giresh, that he was married, but he divorced. We continue in the Gemara. Tanya Idach, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kol mi she'ein oisik b'pir v'ribya, anyone who does not engage in procreation, Ki'ilu shoifech domim. It's as if he spills blood. Shenemar shofech dam ha'adam v'samech lei v'atem pru uruvu. This drasha we saw in the source just before this, also with Rabbi Eliezer, the opening of the immediate preceding source. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah Omer, Ki'ilu mimayid hadmus. Now you see here a different name. This is in this source we have Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah saying what in the source before we saw on the name of Rabbi Yankiv. Ben Azai Omer v'chulei omru lo leBen Azai yeshno adosh, etc. As far as this section of the source with Ben Azai, so it's the same as the source before. Hence the Gemara just says v'chulei, etc., saving ink. Tanu Rabbanon. Uvenuchoy yoimar. This pasuk is from the Torah where the Jewish people were traveling in the desert, and it says, and when they encamped, Shuva Hashem Rivavois Alfei Israel. The Gemara continues at the top of Samach Daled, Melamed. This teaches us She'ein Hashchina Shira Al Pochus Mishnei Alofu Mishnei Rivavos Misrael. The pasuk says, "Shuva Hashem," the divine presence of the Almighty comes when you have Rivavois Alfei Israel. What is Rivavos Alfei? So a ribo is 10,000. Rivavos is the plural of that. That's 20,000. Alfei is the minimum plural of Elef, is 1,000 twice. Alfei be 2,000. So there's a number referred to in this pasuk, namely 22,000. So that we derive from this, as the Gemara says here at the top line, this teaches us that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, does not dwell on less than Shnei Alofu Mishnei Revavos. That's 22,000 Jews. Harei Sheho Yisrael Shnei Alofu Mishnei Revavos Choser Echad. Imagine a situation where the Jewish people were not 22,000, but rather 21,999. But amongst them is one fellow who remained single. He didn't engage in procreation. Is it not so that he causes the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to be removed from Israel? Abu Chonon Omar Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Chayav Misa Shenemar. The pasuk that refers to the two eldest sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and as is known, they died in the service of the Mishkan on the first day of the erection of the Mishkan in the desert. It says regarding Nadav and Avihu, Ubonim lo hoyu lohem, they did not have children. Ha hoyu lohem bonim, had they had children, lo mesu, they wouldn't have died. So since the pasuk feels it of importance to tell us that they didn't have children, we extrapolate that indicates had they had children, then they wouldn't have died. And that's what Abba Chonon is saying, that you see that not having children leads one to death. Chayav Misa. Acherim oimrim goyreim l'shchina shetistalek miYisrael. The drosh of the Acherim is similar to the number 1 above. However, he brings a different pasuk. Shneimar liyos l'chol elikim u'lazaracha acharecha. Bizman shezaracha acharecha, when you have children that follow you, that come after you, then Shechina Shara, then the divine presence dwells. Ein zaracha acharecha, if you don't have children, al mi shara, on what is the divine presence supposed to dwell? Al ha'etzim v'alvonim, on trees and stones, on houses, on monuments, on what? The divine presence is of significance, of value, when the divine presence is upon people, not upon the inanimate. So we come away from this Gemara with a very, very strong exhortation on the part of Chazal to marry and to Mirza Hashem produce children. This is a topic that, once again, as we're making this recording, is a very current, timely topic that affects many amongst our people.